From a creature kept alive by skill and devotion to an equally fragile but comparatively dead art, kept alive by the skill and craftsmanship of men like Frank Hill at a glassworks in Wealdstone. The manufacture of Migliaflore paperweights. Between 150 and 200 canes of glass, each made of 7 layers of different colored glass, are molded into each paperweight. The true art lies in the making of these canes, but because Frank is the only man making them today, much of that process remains a trade secret. An art with a colorful history, glassmaking goes back hundreds of years, and this type of paperweight was originally made in France in about 1845. The tradition of craftsmanship is older still in the Hill family, knowledge being passed from father to son. But even more remarkable, the furnaces here have never been out since the studios began on the site of the Whitefriars Monastery in the London of 1680. Similarly, tools and methods have not altered much, craftsmen often adding touches of their own. For example, once the molten blob of glass has been placed over the glass canes, it is rolled again on a piece of wet newspaper to get its final polish. Finally, the answer to how the pattern got inside the glass, the finished article. For someone who specializes in tableware and commemoration pieces, Frank Hill made goblets for the coronation of George VI and Queen Elizabeth. Ornaments like these are a glowing tribute to him and the little team who make paperweights.
Here is a modern equivalent of the old Palm Court, a coffee bar in Hampstead, London. The sober atmosphere is unchanged, but automation seems to have hit the old orchestra. For the jukebox, normally associated with jazz and rock and roll, is rapidly becoming respectable, and even plays that type of old-fashioned music that one used to hear among the potted palms. At least this way, it's easier than asking the band leader for a favorite tune. There's no danger of having your request refused, provided you put your money in, of course. And now, behind the scenes at a factory in Ilford, Essex, to see how that orchestra is fitted into the box. The envy of all do-it-yourself experts is this profiling machine, which paves the way for the speaker assembly and gets it done before you can say, slow, slow, quick, quick, slow. Several hundred of these machines are completed every month, many of them for export. In one of the larger machines, which offers a choice of 160 different tunes, there is no less than 1,000 feet of wire, used mainly for the complicated selector button system. Fixing and soldering the leads to the selector button assembly is an exacting and skilled job, particularly as the wires are in 10 different colors and each machine has to be fitted with 81 leads. One of the most delicate tasks is the assembly of the record return arm, which must be accurate to 1/5000th of an inch. And introducing one of the few people we know who twists a lot of arms and gets paid for it. The final testing of the mechanism requires skill, patience, and great care. Each machine is given a mechanical third degree lasting 8 hours, and every last minute part takes its turn under the spotlight. Not a new dodge for getting to the tea trolley before everyone else, but a labor and backache-saving device, both important factors here in the final assembly department, where the amplifier is fitted and last-minute adjustments made to the mechanism. The finished machine is installed in a coffee bar where it will give enjoyment to thousands of lovers of light music. So be it rock or skiffle, Strauss or Stravinsky, we're going to see and hear a lot more of the jukebox. It's strange how seldom we connect things with what we normally recognize just because they're in a different form. For instance, that liquid isn't soup, jam, or even paint. So let's throw some light on the subject and tell you first we're at a candle-making factory in Battersea, London, where at this stage of the process, liquid wax is poured into a water-cooled mould and then ejected later as a rack of elegant Venetian candles for the dinner table. Actually, because of the invention of electricity, and more recently fluorescent and neon lighting, people tend to think that candles are merely something from the past. And yet, of course, the distinctive qualities of the candle, its warm glow and serenity, for example, will always ensure a steady flow from the production line. Note that the shapes are formed over one long wick, which is then cut to separate them from the next batch. The emphasis today is naturally on ornamental candles of all shapes and colors. Yet at various times they had other practical uses, such as in auctions by candle in the 17th century. While it's said that Alfred the Great had timekeeping candles, each with 12 divisions marked on it. So there was no excuse whatsoever for burning those cakes. Even more attractive are the slender type specially made to enhance flower arrangements. You'll notice later that these burn at an angle so that the wax never drips. Craftsmanship is very much in evidence these days. Here, a giant candle is not being washed, but being given an added coating of paraffin wax, itself a development of the last century. Until then, there were two main types of candle, tallow and, more expensive, beeswax. Tallow must have been pretty primitive and even stank to high heaven, but at least it had the advantage of being edible if you suddenly felt hungry. With these Chinese mandarin candles, the relief effect is obtained by dipping them in colored wax and then wiping to bring out the two-color pattern. Here's a simple little trick of the trade, which just goes to show how simple these processes are, when you know how. They're first dipped in colored wax and given a second bath and twirl around until the crest of the spiral is left clean of color. These delightful finished exhibits prove conclusively, if we wanted proof, that any arguments about candles being a thing of the past are just not worth a light.
If that was a little confusing, let's see if you'll bark up the wrong tree when we ask you to see if you can identify this strange contraption and its setting. Surprisingly enough, it has nothing to do with atomic research, although we'll guarantee the answer will rock you just the same. Well, if you haven't already guessed, and so as not to spoil 1 second of a visit we've all wanted to make some time or other, we're in the rock-making department of a sweet factory in Wood Green, London. And that strange-looking machine was where the rock toffee is first boiled. The basic recipe, for the benefit of those do-it-yourself enthusiasts who have a sweet tooth, is 100 weight of glucose and 100 weight of pure cane sugar boiled at 260 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, come to think of it, perhaps it's not worth going to all that trouble. For the job that's always puzzled us, the art of lettering the rock, let's meet foreman Jerry Toll, who's been making rock for 38 years. A skill handed down by his father, who had been making it for 48 years. Each letter is built separately. Thin strips of toffee cut to length and fitted together so that the visible ends form the outline. When the letters have been fitted in, this large lump of toffee, called a batch, weighs about 200 weight. Still in a soft, doughy state, it molds easily in the skilled hands of these craftsmen and is rolled into shape like a huge, appetizing Swiss roll.
The next stage is to stretch the rock, and this is the way they do it. The men work at speed because the whole process must be completed within 1 hour, otherwise it becomes too hard to handle. The final rolling and stretching is done by hand, until what started as a lump of toffee, not much longer than a walking stick, has become 180 yards of trim rock. Although this rolling looks easy enough, it is in fact a highly skilled job, men like Michael Young having to serve an apprenticeship of 6 years. Finally, the rock is cut into strips 7 inches long, in itself a fascinating performance. The finished product is in fact practically a work of art it seems a pity to eat. Oh well, who cares about art anyway?
Sitting in Dad's favorite seat in Junior's model rocket is the test rider at a South London Fairground toy factory. Called Spaceship, the model is typical of the way Fairground Toys are now being geared to modern youngsters' ideas about fun. Yesterday's rocking horse has had a stripe or two added to become a more modern favorite. Other horses are still popular so long as they're real cowboy style with all the trimmings. Apart from the youngsters' demands for up-to-date ideas, there are other rules laid down by even higher authorities about these toys. They must be robust and danger-proof, and any electrical parts must work on only 12 volts. None of the horses must bite either. The helicopter's revolving blade works on friction drive, so it will stop if a hand is inserted. Otherwise, it has all the thrills of the real thing and rises to a height of 8 feet from the ground. A high-flying idea, this, from a factory determined to keep moving in any direction with the times. Cowboy and spaceman heroes come and go, but footballers retain their popularity over the years. Teams like the Arsenal are now part of British tradition and history, while players like the Gunners captain Cliff Holton and internationals Bowen and Tapscott are household names. Even so, the most important thing on the field is the ball. So let's look behind the scenes at this South London factory where footballs have been made since 1891. Although the finished article takes such a beating, the ball is nevertheless a delicate piece of craftsmanship. The manufacture has changed little, the emphasis being always on quality. About 3 square feet of carefully chosen hide goes into the 12 or 18 panels that make up the ball, and more panels, the less risk of stretching, although the panels themselves are stretched before being stitched together. This is the way it's done by 70-year-old Joe Kidd, a retired policeman. He sent quite a few people up for a different kind of stretch in his time. Next stage is to put the panels together, and here there is no substitute for hand sewing. Turned inside out, the panels require roughly 500 stitches, one 12-panel ball taking as long as an hour and a half. Because of the enormous length of seam required, it's unlikely that footballs of more than 18 panels will ever be made. But then there's no demand for them anyway, apart from short-sighted referees. Finally, the bladder is inserted, inflated to a pressure of 12 pounds per square inch, and the ball is finished apart from the usual tests. By the time one of these footballs reaches Wembley for a cup final, you can be sure it's in tip-top condition. So if your team loses, by all means blame the referee, but don't blame the ball.
To a place where history is always being repeated. Here, at a famous North London firm of geographers, 60,000 globes of the world are made every year. How the real world began has always been a fascinating study, but there's a set method of world making at these workshops, a complicated craft dating back to 1492 when the first known globe was made. Round a solid ball of wood is built up a hollow shell of stiff paper, which is then coated with plaster. Nine separate layers of plaster are applied to a thickness of 1/8 of an inch. Moulding takes about 6 hours, and a fine, smooth surface is imparted to the world in miniature. Once the globe is set and dried, it passes to another department where the covering map is pasted on. Like restoring the skin to a peeled orange, the coloured printed sections exactly cover the surface. But the covering process calls for a keen eye and steady hand. A fraction of an inch out will put the world miles out of joint. The globes come in a large variety of sizes and purposes, from an inch in diameter to 6 feet, and ranging in price from 16 shillings to £1,000. The different types of globe include celestial, political and relief, or slate-coloured spheres for use with chalks. In keeping with their subject, the globe makers have a world market. 90% are made for export. They're printed in all languages, including Russian, and the majority go to schools. From first to last, the complete job takes 15 hours. A final coat of varnish adds a protective shine. Nearly 100 of the staff have been there for more than 30 years. While the rest of mankind does its best to blow the world up, they like building a new one.
Power now put to its most artistic use, the beating and rolling of bars of gold, each one worth £1,000, into the sheerest gold leaf. At this factory in Ruislip, Middlesex, first stage is the casting of the gold bar. Most of us would be perfectly happy with just a bar of the stuff, but because of its brilliance of effect and remarkable durability, gold is put to more practical uses. And that gold bar we saw, after being beaten by hammer, is now rolled with increasing pressure into a ribbon 300 feet long and 1/1000th of an inch thick, and then cut into squares. This is an industry that goes back to the earliest times. In fact, gold beating by the Egyptians of 2,000 to 3,000 BC can still be seen untarnished and unbroken on mummy cases in the British Museum. Craftsmanship is still the key factor, and techniques haven't changed much, except that today gold is beaten to 1/10 the consistency of ancient times, believe it or not, to 4/millionths of an inch. From original gold bar to the finished leaf takes 7 stages, involving several quartering and beating processes, so eventually laid side by side, the leaves from one bar would cover over 9,000 square feet. Every process requires skill of the highest order, but experts like the machine hammer foreman can check thickness from sight alone. Notice, by the way, that the leaves are protected by skins of vellum, specially made from the intestines of an ox, and the whole lot enclosed in bands of parchment, making what is called a ch. Work in every aspect of gold leaf is so precise and delicate that a hare's foot is used for powdering or cleaning the protective skins, which, because of their strength and resilience, are more valuable than the gold leaf they hold for beating. They're even smelled from time to time to check their condition, which varies in different weathers. Strange as it seems, the traditional skill of hand beating is no slower than the mechanized way, and considerably more precise. a man has to be apprenticed for several years before he's considered expert, and 77-year-old Joe Woodward has been doing it for 63 years and using the same hammer. The finished leaf is cut into 3.5-inch squares, not by knife, because the gold in this stage would stick to steel, but by sharpened bamboo. The leaf is now ready for use. Outdoors on landmarks like the cross on the Dome of St. Paul's and the gates of Buckingham Palace, and inside in such arts as gilding picture frames. Altogether, a remarkable transformation. Gold leaf, less than a wavelength of light in thickness, a little known but truly golden work of art. From modern wonders like flying, we take a look at something that has its roots in the earliest civilizations, yet still manages to provide a constant source of curiosity and delight: ice cream. To see some of the wonders of its manufacture today, we visit one of the world's largest ice cream factories at Kensington, just in time to witness the birth of hundreds and hundreds of chalk ices. Having driven the 14 at a time strips of ice cream through the miniature waterfall of molten chocolate and passed them through still more to cover the bottoms, these robot-like machines, working with icy indifference, finally transfer the new blocks of chalk ice by further automatic devices to the wrapping machines. However, one aspect of production still relies on the craftsmanship that only human hands and artistic flair can provide. The fabulous ice cream models and delicacies like this gatto, which contains layers of sponge and the 3 flavors of ice cream in equal proportions. Figures like these are, of course, products of comparatively modern ingenuity. But ice cream goes back to the days of Alexander the Great. Perhaps not as we know it, but mixtures like milk, sweetened and served in bowls with frozen snow. It's said, too, that the Roman Emperor Nero ordered slaves to bring him snow from distant mountains. Flavored with fruit juices and honey, he enjoyed it while watching his gladiators. To delight any child, this Madame Pompadour doll has a crinoline of deluxe vanilla and strawberry ice cream decorated with piping cream. There's no doubt it looks good enough to eat. From schoolboy builders to an industry which has grown from what is usually regarded as a schoolboy's hobby, the making of model aircraft. But the standard of workmanship at this industrial model maker's works at Westway in London is as far removed from schoolboy efforts as a headmaster is from his most backward pupil. Many of the models, all exactly scaled down from the maker's blueprints, are destined for the windows of travel agencies and airline companies all over the world. The considerable range of models made here can be gauged by the prices, which vary from £3 to £1,500. All the component parts are made at the works, and all 60 of the craftsmen working here are equally at home with the 3 main mediums: wood, metal, and plastic. Most of today's passenger aircraft have, to the layman's eye, about as much external individuality as an aluminium cigar tube. So these models are, as often as not, fitted with transparent plastic sides so that the prospective passengers can see exactly what sort of interior comfort to expect. Managing Director Ian Walker demonstrates the capacity and easy loading features of a freighter for quick reference by possible purchasers. The finish on the models is quite as important as it is on the real thing, and no effort is spared to produce a gleaming, perfectly streamlined miniature. Here, on a Provost, a training plane for RAF fighter pilots, a final detail on the formidable rocket armament is picked out. This aircraft factory in miniature is doing a first-class job of making an air-minded world aware of the increasing ingenuity, care and skill that goes into the construction of today's passenger aircraft.